וגם להבין מוהוס מדרגס הבינוני. Besides the various questions from the Gemaras that he brought down, there's a question on the definition. How could there be such a thing as a Beinin? The way we learn the Pashtos, that Tzadikim, Rishon, Beininim is measured by a person's actions. So a Tzadik does mitzvahs and a Rasha does Averis. So then what's a Beininim? Shebevad, Einei Mechza Schuyis and Mechza Averis. The way you learn simply is a Beininim is half and half, it's half mitzvahs and half Averis. We're going to bring later such. So that can't be. How did Rabbi make a mistake and think that he's a Beinani? Rabbi said, Kegeina no Beinani. Abaye said, it's a Kenishnaim. But how could Rabbi even think like that? V'noida de lepasik pume migirsa. The Gemara says about Rabbi that the Malach HaMaves wanted to bring him so that he should answer the question that they had in Mesifta Shamayla, and he couldn't get near him because Rabbi was busy learning at Shafilu Malach HaMaves Lehayu Yachal Lishlitbei, that the Malach HaMaves couldn't gain control over him. So you see, first of all, the time that Rabbi spent every second learning, and the level of his learning, the intensity of his learning was to such a degree that it created an aura of Kedusha around him that the Malachim couldn't get near him. So there was no possibility of him having time to do Mechza Venus. How could he say Kedin Anabin? It says that the Kutzke Rebbe said he's not looking for Chassidim that should be so holy they don't do Avenis. He wants to have Chassidim, but Savinish Kinsaitz was in the game. He had no time to do Avenis. Rabbi was busy and there wasn't time in his schedule to turn Avenis. So whenever you hear tapes of Shiur, and I used to hear, you'd hear different Shiur, Rabbi would give a Shiur Lakewood and Borough Park, so different Shiurim. So the inevitable question, people who learned this Perek and Tanya, this Raya of the Alter Rebbe, they would ask, what's the Raya? Maybe Rabbi said it with Anivus. He was an Onav, and therefore he said, Kegein Ana Beinani. How does the Alter Rebbe prove from here what the definition of a Beinani is, that a Beinani can be Mechza Schuyas and Mechza Avenis? So that question comes from an erroneous understanding of what Anivus is, a misconception of what Anivus is. In the world, some people think that Anivus means that I know I'm a great guy, but since I'm an Onav, so I'll tell people that I'm really bad. I'll tell people I'm really a Beinani. That's not Anivus, that's falsehood, it's narishkeit. That's what the Friedrich Rebbe brings in the Zechrenis, a story that there was a Psashul, and on Simchas Torah they announced that the biggest Onav gets the next Hakafa. And everyone stood in line, because everyone said, I'm the biggest Onav. Onav is that you're not machzik teva la'atzmei, and that's why it says Moshe Rabbeinu was a Onav mikol adam asher pnei adama. Moshe knew his Maila, and he knew that he's the one who was Kibul Torah Misinai, no one else. And nevertheless, he didn't give himself credit for it, because he said if someone else would have those keiches, that person would go even further. He knew that it's thanks to the keiches that the Eibishter gave him. But he didn't fool himself about where he was holding. To fool a person's self, to fool yourself, whether l'mal yusa or l'greyusa, either way, is the biggest stumbling block in Avodas Hashem. And therefore, Rabbi couldn't fool himself. Befrata inyan of Maisa B'Peil. So therefore, if Rabbi said Kegein Ana Beinani, there had to be a possibility of thinking that he's a Beinani. If there was no room for him, no time for him to do any Averis, so what's the Beinani? What's the Mechza Averis? That's one question. Then there's a technical question on the possible existence of a Beinani. The way we're thinking now, doing mitzvahs is a tzaddik, and Aveira is a rasha. There's no in between. How could you be in between? What's a Beinani? A person, you have a gashmistic illness, just like a virus, you have a gashmistic disease. If someone has it, and he's not well. If he doesn't have it, then he's healthy. Yeah, you go for a COVID test, they give you a swab. test positive, you have the virus. If you test negative, you don't have the virus. Could you be in between? You can't be in between. Either you have it or you don't. There's something you go to someone on the phone, you ask him, did you put on tefillin? Either he put on tefillin or he didn't put on tefillin. I'm like average. What's average? Yes or no?
Actually, not really.
Well, yeah. So that's Alter Rebbe is going to try to look for some compromise over here, because the passion is a question. When you make, that's the same thing with every cheshbon hanefesh. When it comes to ma'aseh b'peil, does getan or does nicht getan? What's in between? There's no in between. Maybe fragt Alter Rebbe, what's meint b'chlal habeini? Veit sharei b'shah sha'isa aveinos. When a person does averis, at that time, until he removes the blemish of the averis from himself, nikra rasha gomer. He's called a rasha gomer. If he did tshuva and he removed the aveira, nikra tzadik gomer. Then he's a tzadik gomer. There's no in between. Like it says in the Gemara in Kiddushin, "Mekadesh es isha al minas shani tzadik." Afilu rasha gomer mekudesh es shema here tshuva believe. So you see the instant that someone thinks tshuva, even a low level of tshuva, he's a tzaddik, and there it says he's a tzaddik gomer. So without tshuva, as long as the aveira, the effect of the aveira is still there, he's a rasha gomer. If he did tshuva, he's a tzaddik gomer. Where's there a place for an in between? Vafilu ha'aver al iser kal shel divri sefer mikri rasha. Even someone is aver on aveira derabanan, he's called a rasha. Kedisa beperek beis diavamis. That there calls someone a rasha for being aver and a derabanan, so we wouldn't be able to answer. Maybe a beinani, in between, of someone who didn't do any averis deiraisa, but he was aver and a derabanan. No, that's a rasha. If he didn't do a derabanan, he's a tzaddik. What's in between? Afilu mishiyesh biyadei limchais v'lei micha nikra rasha. The Perek Vav the Shvus. Even someone who didn't take a chance to be meicha and someone else doing an aveira is also called a rasha. So you can't have that option of finding an in-between either. The kol shekei v'kavachemer b'mevatel eze mitzvah sasei she'ef shalei l'kaima, which is a deiraisa, is for sure called a rasha. So again, we're struggling. How could you have someone who's a beinani? There's no in-between. Either you did what you have to or you didn't do what you have to. Now here there's an obvious question, just so we see. If someone is yesh biyadei limchais v'loy micha, you have a mitzvah saseh deiraisa to stop someone from doing an aveira, right? Techiach es hamisacha is a mitzvah saseh deiraisa. So why is it vafilu? Why is that like less than someone who's aver and a isur derabbanan? Someone who's yesh biyadei limchais v'loy micha is aver and a deiraisa. And how does he say after that? V'kol shekem v'kavachemer b'mevatel eze mitzvah say she'ef shalei l'kaima, as if mevatel mitzvah say is worse than yesh biyadei limchas. Yesh biyadei limchas is mevatel mitzvah say. He's mevatel the mitzvah say v'chei chesam misacha. So the question is asked and discussed. There's one answer that suggested that sometimes there's no mitzvah v'chei techiyach. Certain cases where the person doesn't know he's aver and avera. So you don't have a chiyah, a mitzvah saseh deraisa, a chiyah techiyah. You just yesh biyadei limchas. You have to stop. You have a kol Yisrael arevin zavaz. But another answer could be that we see in Perek Vav the Shvuos, bishi yesh biyadei limchas v'loy micha. If I see someone else doing an aveira, I'm called a Russian. It's at his aveira. Who nitfas ba'esei avim. So I get a part of his Aveda, besides that my mitzvah of Teichach. What's the nafkamina? Hecheach Techiach, I could do tshuva for Hecheach Techiach. Bring a carbon oil, I was mevatel mitzvah. But I didn't do tshuva on the Yesh B'yadei Limchis V'lei Micha. I'll give you a practical example, so you see. I see someone hurting someone else's feelings. He's being aver on Leseinu Isha Samisim, right? I have a mitzvah of Hecheach Techiach es hamisacha. And I have the inyan of Mishiyesh biyadei limchis v'lei micha u'nitfas b'esei avim. I didn't say anything, so I was aver on these two things. I did tshuva on Hecheach Techiach, on a mitzvah saseh. How do I do tshuva? All the inyanim of tshuva. Maybe I brought a carbon oil. If you say Hecheach Techiach as bein adam l'chaveri, the person who did the ainah, I asked him mechila for not to do Techiach. But mitzad the yesh biyadei limchis v'lo nicha hu nitfas ba'isayavin. If I'm a part of his avera, that means I have to do tshuva to the person who got misana, to the person who was harassed, because I'm part of that avera. So if I did tshuva for Eichecha, I have no problem for a mitzvah essay deiraisa of Teichecha, and I'm still a Rasha because of the yesh biyadei limchis for that avera, which is less than a mitzvah essay deiraisa. It's the part that I have in someone else's avera. That's the vafilu, and that's the kol shekei v'kavachemer. If I'm mevatel a mitzvah essay deiraisa, that I have my own avera. You got it or not? Okay. Anyways, we see that anyone who has whatever level of avera is called a rasha. If someone's able to learn Torah and he doesn't learn Torah, so he's called a rasha. And the reason why it says in this vafilu, it says he's chayiv kares. It's one of the worst mitzvahs. But the Gemara says that that's something that every person is sometimes falls in. Bittul Torah is from the things that in the time between when you wake up in the morning and you're running to yeshiva, it could be a second that you get distracted. A car is driving by, you can stop learning for a second. So a person could be challenged in Bittul Torah. So it's something that every person finds a time. And nevertheless, you're called a rasha, even something like that that's so hard to avoid. And a beinani can't be that, because that's a rasha. So it's echt nicht a beinani. Can't even be someone who has bittul Torah. Shita the mikri rasha, someone who's over on the mitzvahs essay deiraisa bittul Torah, tfei me'ever this is derabana. He's worse than a derabana, because it's a deiraisa, even though it's a deiraisa that's very difficult to be safe from, to avoid. So we don't know how there could exist a beinani. The question was, how is there a possibility? What does it mean in between? You're a tzaddik or you're a rasha. Yeah, you came to chassidus or you didn't come to chassidus. You put on tefillin or you didn't put on tefillin. You are positive and what does it mean in between? That's the question. That question we didn't answer. But what we established, Alter Rabbi said, is we see al kapanim that if there's an in-between, he has to be someone who doesn't even have any of these categories that's a rasha. Whatever's a rasha is not in between. If you don't have any of those things, you should be a tzaddik. That's what Tanya is going to explain to us, that a tzaddik goes beyond missing any of these things. But the beinani for sure doesn't have any of these factors that could make someone a rasha. He doesn't even have oven bittul Torah, and the afilu again is not because bittul Torah is a light thing. Bittul Torah is a very severe thing that is karis to karis, but bittul Torah is a very common avera. And the beinani, even though it's so hard to be careful from it, but the beinani is not even going to fall on bittul Torah. He has that strength that he avoids even that. This will answer the question, how could Rabbi think even mitzad anivos that he's a beinani? So the details, the Sefer is going to explain what's a beinani. But if we know that Rabbi didn't waste a second from his learning, like pasuk pumbe migirsa shafilu malachamavis lihaya yachal lishlei, that's not a reason for him not to be able to think that he's a beinani, because a beinani also doesn't have even a moment of an avera, doesn't even have a moment of bittul Torah. And the specifics we'll have to see later. Haga. So Alter Rebbe asked this in Mashakasa B'Zayah. Chela Gimel Daf Reish Lamed Aleph Kol Shemimu Watun Avinesa V'Chulu. Rav Amnuna went to Eliyahu Hanavi, met Eliyahu Hanavi, and he said, maybe, why do you find sometimes a tzaddik viraloi, a tzaddik that suffers? Maybe because he has some averis, he has very few averis, so therefore, Mulmaila, they give him suffering so that he should be able to not be held back, like we brought before from the Gemara, tzaddik viraloi, tzaddik she'enei gamur. So you see in Zayar even, that Rav Amnuna seemed to say that there could be a tzaddik who has averis, but he has memuatan avinesa. And not like we're saying that it's even a beinin, he doesn't even have any averis. Says the Alter Rebbe, he sheilas Rav Amnuna l'Eliyahu. Rav Amnuna asked Eliyahu if that's the case. It's not the maskana of the Zayah. Alef Aval Lefi Tshuvas Eliyahu Shal Apir Tzadik V'Ralei U'Kamesh Kasav B'Nai Mahemna Pash Mishpatim B'Rei. Eliyahu answered Rav Hamnuna and he said, no, why is there Tzadik V'Ralei? Not because he has Memuat Navinesa. Because he's Nitfas Ba'ovin Hadir. He's suffering because his generation is bad. So he doesn't have any of it. How is this connected with the pshat of the Raya Mehemna D'Leil? The Raya Mehemna said, Tzadik V'Ralei means Shara Shabei Kofif L'Tayim. L'Chayra, because that Eliyahu Hanavi said to him, that there's a tzaddik who's nitfas ba'avin hadeir. How gufa, why is the tzaddik affected by the day? He's higher, he's a tzaddik. What's that to come with it? Because he has some shaykhs to them. He has a ra loy, that he has a ra that's kofuf l'tayim, that gives him a connection to the day at least that he's nitfas ba'avin hadeir. Like when there's a tzaddik, was hat in ganzen nicht kein shaykhs. He has no connection at all. So then they don't affect him in such a way that he should have suffering from the Oven Adin. His suffering is because he's a tzaddik virali. And therefore the answer of Eliyahu is, Akapanim, it has nothing to do with Averis, but it is like the Raya Mehemna that he's a tzaddik virali. How could Rav Hamnuna have had a Havamina? That it means Memuat Navinesaf and L'Cheira that the Rebbe brought all these clear rayas that a tzaddik can't even have a single Avera. Shivin Panim Latera, his Havamina of Rav Hamnuna was because he thought, you know, there's Shivin Panim Latera, there's different ways of interpreting what a tzaddik, and maybe there's another pshat in which a tzaddik could be even someone that's Memuat Navinesaf. 18. Okay. Well, that means about.